will be distributed widely. All right, and with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Murray.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Last week, we saw a level of chaos and recklessness from the Trump administration that is truly unlike anything I have seen in my lifetime. When the administration moved to brazenly and illegally freeze federal grants across government and across the country, the panic, the confusion were widespread because there was a long, long list of programs President Trump tried to put on the chopping block. Then, less than 48 hours later, in the face of intense public backlash and outrage from people all over our country, they admitted they were disastrously wrong and revoked the OMB memo. But it's really important. The fight is far from over. Not only is there still significant confusion, funding that was supposed to be turned back on, that is still not, it's still locked up. But just as importantly, people need to understand the Trump administration is still holding up billions of dollars under Trump's illegal day one executive orders. We are talking about funding that Congress passed into law, funding that is owed to communities in Washington state and across the country. Now, the harm they are causing with these funding freezes is hard to overstate because this has never been done before. And we have been working around the clock to figure out exactly what all of this means and who is affected, because they have been far from clear. But today, I want to give you all a sense of what folks across our state have told me about what Trump's ongoing illegal funding freezes has meant for them. The Washington State Department of Transportation told me that Trump is blocking money to repair electric chargers, to install the heavy-duty chargers for trucks, and to make critical repairs to bridges in order to protect the safety of millions of drivers, and to install new chargers along major roads like I-90, US 97, US 2, US 195, and US 395. Trump is still holding up road projects that make our streets safer for our pedestrians, for our cyclists, for our drivers. Safe street projects in Richland, critical safety barriers in Spokane are just a few of the examples. Trump's illegal freeze is, as we speak, blocking wildlife preservation work all over our state and critical culvert replacement projects to help save our salmon. There are port projects right now on hold all across Washington state, including for electrical infrastructure and shore power for our vessels. Absolutely essential electrical transmission and distribution projects are on hold and in jeopardy. And there are many other projects and organizations and people who are being harmed right now by the president's reckless funding freeze. Medical researchers in Washington state who are worried that their work will somehow be considered woke, when in reality, it's actually pretty darn important we understand the roots of health disparities. Things like why the maternal death rate is so much higher for Black and Native American women. Trump's executive orders also froze life-saving foreign assistance for people all around the globe. And world-class organizations in our state, in Washington state, have told me they may have to lay off people this week, hundreds of people, because of Trump's illegal funding freezes. It is just completely unclear when or if these projects are going to get the funds they're counting on and owed from the bills Congress passed into law long before Trump came into office. So make no mistake, the chaos is not over. There are still billions of dollars being illegally held up, and many jobs in Washington state are now on the line. I'm going to continue fighting on this and pressing the administration every way I can to make them end these illegal funding freezes. Democrats will speak out. We will challenge Trump's illegal actions in the courts. We will demand accountability. And we will put the pressure on the administration and on our Republican colleagues. But we also need our Republican colleagues to say enough. We need them to join us. Now, we did learn something extremely important last week, and that was when American people all across our state, all across the country spoke out with one voice. And when regular people stand up, it makes a difference. So this fight is far from over. I'm going to continue doing everything I can as vice chair of the Appropriations Committee to stand up and hold this administration to account so we can get the money that Congress, both parties, Republicans and Democrats, passed into law flowing again to folks back home in Washington State. I'm joined with some people on the ground in Washington who are seeing these impacts. I really appreciate all of you being here. And with that, let me turn it over to Councilmember Girmay Zahilay.
Thank you so much, Senator Murray. It really makes me hopeful that we have an ally at the federal level who partners with state and local governments to solve problems on the ground for the residents of Washington State. I'm Girmay Zahilay. I'm the chair of the King County Council, and I'm here to tell you that King County is currently experiencing what our budget director has called the worst budget crisis since the Great Depression for several reasons, including limitations placed on our government by the state, massive inflation, and huge population growth. King County's revenues have been unable to keep up with the cost of delivering critical services to our constituents, and this has resulted in the need to cut $150 million from our general fund this year. The way this will play out in real terms are deep cuts to social services and public health, deep cuts to law enforcement and courts, fewer resources for diversion programs and mental health. A federal funding freeze at this time would make an already dire situation far worse. We will see the public safety crisis get worse. We'll see people suffering for longer periods without addiction recovery or emergency housing resources. We'll see delays in desperately needed public transit investments that the senator already described. We'll see seniors and veterans lose access to critical services. King County needs both immediate state intervention to fix this structural gap between our revenues and our costs, as well as federal level help to stop the Trump administration's threats to our federal resources and our values. I thank Senator Murray for all her help and attention to this matter. So many of our constituents, especially the most vulnerable ones, are depending on this work.
AC, you want to go?
Sure. Well, good morning. Thank you, Senator Murray. My name is Casey Sixkiller. I'm the director of the Washington State Department of Ecology and a member of Governor Bob Ferguson's cabinet. Senator Murray, thank you so much for bringing us together today to address the very real consequences for communities across Washington State of the ongoing freeze of federal funds. This is funding already awarded by the federal government and intended for urgent environmental and public health projects. This is not just bureaucratic red tape. This is political theater with real-world consequences. Right now, nearly $53 million in EPA grants that were legally appropriated by Congress and allocated by the EPA are being held up. That is money that should be flowing into our communities, creating jobs, protecting public health, and improving the environment. Instead, it is being delayed at the expense of the people who need it most. The Washington State Department of Ecology administers hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding, the majority of which passes through directly to communities across our state. The Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law accounts for nearly $180 million. A significant portion of that, over $100 million, comes from just the EPA. These funds support at least 20 essential programs that touch on water quality, toxic cleanup, hazardous waste reduction, air quality, shoreline restoration, and solid waste management. In total, Ecology has 22 active grants from NOAA and EPA. While NOAA grants have been restored, 13 EPA grants remain frozen, impacting $53 million in federal funding. $35 million has already been awarded and dispersed, but is now inaccessible to our agency. Another $18 million has been awarded but not yet dispersed. This funding freeze isn't just numbers on a page. It means projects that are vital to our state are stalled. That includes protecting salmon streams from toxic chemicals in Seattle. Ecology had planned to use funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law for 2 stormwater projects designed to capture oil, metals, PCBs, and PFAS before they reach salmon habitats in Thornton Creek and Puget Sound. Out of $16 million in state and federal funding, $4 million in federal funds is now frozen, delaying this critical work. We're also working to protect and restore habitat along our streams to help salmon recover and improve water quality. Ecology is just getting started on a $30 million commitment from the federal government for critical riparian habitat protection and restoration across our state. We've been working to restore contaminated sites, including in the Tri-Cities, with $4 million in federal funding for brownfield site cleanups that is now frozen, putting on hold a 44-acre redevelopment project in Richland intended to create new housing, shopping areas, and parks. And of course, addressing and cleaning up legacy pollution, projects aimed at removing toxic chemicals from public water systems, cleaning up arsenic and lead from former orchard lands, and restoring contaminated land for productive use. We're all being affected. The Ferguson administration is doing everything in our power to ensure this money gets where it belongs, into our communities. Congress intended these funds to benefit the people of Washington, and we will not stop fighting until they are released. For ecology, these funds put boots on the ground. They clean up our environment and they protect our families. Holding them up is not just a bureaucratic issue, it is a direct threat to public health, economic growth, and environmental justice. These funds should be released immediately. Washington State cannot afford delays when it comes to protecting our water, land, air, and communities. Thank you, Senator Murray.
Oh,
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Joel Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington State Association of Head Start ECEAP. I'm glad to be joined by my colleagues today and of course, Senator Murray, who's been a longtime advocate for the Head Start program. I will start with this. I have a simple question for everyone here, which is, why is Donald Trump trying to bully little preschoolers? And that's what's happened over the last week and a half. The funding freeze impacted all of the Head Start kids. We serve about 13,000 children in the state of Washington. These are children who are experiencing homelessness, significant delays, disabilities, and are living in deep poverty. And that funding freeze put their childcare at risk last week. Even today, I still have one Head Start grantee who's unable to access federal funds. And they're not alone, not just in Washington State. My colleagues in other states are reporting that there are more than 45 grantees who are in need of Head Start services but cannot access that. Over 20,000 Head Start kids could potentially lose their childcare so their parents can go to work. So I'm concerned about this. It's caused incredible amount of confusion and chaos in our community. And Head Start families really rely on these services to get their kids ready for school and also so that they can go to their jobs. And when they can't work, that hurts all of us because it impacts the economy. It makes it more difficult for people to work more hours and to balance their work and life. So I'm really sad at what's continuing to happen, but it's still impacting Head Start kids and families in our state. I'll say this as well. The other thing I'm concerned about is that if we're being honest with everybody here, the Trump administration and their congressional allies appear to be hewing very closely to the blueprint that on Project 2025 before they came into office. As everyone knows, they called for the elimination of the Head Start program. So our members are very concerned that this is the start, the beginning of a long effort to try to dismantle and chop up the Head Start program, as well as other services for low-income children and families. And we think that they're doing this in service to a giant tax cut for very wealthy people and large corporations. So I remain concerned today about the impacts on low-income kids and families, but I also worry about the impacts down the road that we might be facing with the Head Start program. So I'm very thankful that I have the opportunity to join my co-partners today in describing the real-world impacts. We do have a Head Start grantee who cannot access federal funds today and is probably a couple days away from not being able to pay their bills. They won't be able to pay their teachers. And at some point, they may be forced to let their families know that they're not going to be able to provide childcare for those families. So I thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right. So with that, we can take questions from reporters. If folks want to use the raise your hand function, you'll see at the very bottom, react, and then raise your hand, and then we'll call on folks and just list your name and your outlet and who your question is directed to. All right, we've got our first question from Carolyn.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. I'm reporting for the North Association Weekly. I actually want to know how all of these funding freezes would specifically impact Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities in King County, especially with regards to, say, elder services such as ICHS's work.
Carolyn, it's hard to answer globally that, but essentially the funding freeze that the Trump administration and Elon Musk put into place last week affected many organizations across the board, from Head Start that you just heard about, to Meals on Wheels, to many of the community health centers that serve populations specifically that you're talking about. I keep hearing these words from Trump about DEI and all this. Well, these are people in our communities. These are residents in our community, and people are very confused on the ground about what the heck they're targeting. And does any funding stream that impacts minority communities or disability communities or low-income communities, is that just kicked out now because they have decided that's who they're going after? As Joel said, in order to pull a lot of funding back to Washington, D.C., for them to give a tax break to the wealthiest Americans. It is truly frightening.
Thanks very much.
All right, looks like we have our next question from Bellamy with KNKX.
Hi there. Thanks for the call. What is the strategy for getting them to release these funds? I mean, they seem to be in breach of contract, maybe, but like that doesn't seem to matter. So what do you do?
Bellamy, I think that is a question that every one of us in our hearts and souls and minds are trying to tackle at every level. Here, what I am doing is telling people what the impacts are. I know many of them because I am getting the phone calls overwhelming into my office from small little community groups to projects that are counting on this funding to people that have payrolls, and trying to share that with everyone so they understand how this is. Secondly, we are using those stories and helping all of those organizations outside of us who are filing claims to get the courts to stop these illegal confiscation of funds. So a lot of this is going to be in lawsuits, and obviously that takes time, and I am deeply concerned about that, but that is the one avenue we're going to go to. Now, I will say, I'm concerned that it seems to me that this Trump administration kind of doesn't care about the laws. We're seeing that across the board. So that means this may take a while, but I want people to know that is absolutely how we have to go after this. And third, we are looking at legislation, although again, that's a law that they can break, but we're looking at what we can do to make sure that this administration and any administration follows the laws.
All right, just a reminder to use the raise your hand function, and we've got Manuel with the Seattle Times.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much. A story by Politico from last night said that the EPA directed the agency officials to allow the disbursement of funds from the Inflation Reduction Act that had been previously frozen. Do we know anything about that?
I'll let Casey answer that, but I will tell you that although court orders last week and some agencies said they were going to turn the funds back on, many people are still calling us and saying the portals are not yet open, the funds are not yet flowing. And I will just say globally, even if they were trying to do this in the right way and turn it back on, you can't just turn off funding and then say, oh, now here it comes. So they've created chaos alone that is causing a lot of problems. But we also have sort of a lawless agency directive out there that is telling people one thing and doing another. But I think, Casey, if you can help us answer what you're actually seeing in funds flowing to you after the court orders and even now.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Thanks for that question. As of last night, the funding had not started to flow to us under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act from EPA, despite a temporary restraining order issued by a federal court. That might be changing now as we're on the phone, as we continue to hit refresh on the various portals. But to the senator's point, we hope that money will continue to flow, but the uncertainty about if, when, for how long has a significant impact on our ability to carry out our mission and to support the work that's going on on the ground. And, I heard even from staff yesterday about getting mixed messages from the different programs they're working in and grant programs they're utilizing from EPA about whether they can continue their work or not. So, this is going to be an ongoing thing for our agency and on every other agency at the state level that depends on federal funding. And I would just add, at the state of Washington, it's $27 billion annually that we get from the federal government to support everything from Medicaid and all the other programs that Senator Murray mentioned. So this is a significant disruption in service and a significant threat to families across our state.
And I will remind you that a lot of this money flows to contractors that we have signed contracts with to do the actual work. Contractors aren't going to say, pay me when you figure this out. They're under contract. So stopping work on essential projects that Casey referred to, or that Girmay knows is so important, or Head Start programs, or transportation projects, not only impacts those projects, those people, those communities, it impacts those people who are going to work and are now being told that they are not going to have a job anymore because a contract is in question.
Thank you.
All right, and our next question is from Claire with Seattle Times.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. My question is for Joel. I wanted to ask about the program that's been locked out of the payment system, the Head Start program. Has that been consistent since last week, or is that sort of a new problem? And how many programs have been affected by not being able to get into the payment system at all?
Well, thanks, Claire. The last couple of days, we've had about a quarter of our Head Start grantees report to me that they were unable to get into and access their federal grants. Of today, we have one confirmed program up in the Olympic Peninsula. They serve, so they've been waiting since last week. It's not as though the portal was open and then closed. They have not been able to access their funds since the funding freeze. So they are still getting a pending approval message. And that's a problem. This is a very small program. 18% of the kids in this program are dealing with a disability. And about 12% of these kids are experiencing homelessness. It's a very rural community. So this program, I think, is trying to figure out what do they do? I mean, if this keeps on going for a few more days, they could be in some trouble, and they may have to tell these families, I'm sorry, we don't have another option. I will say, particularly for kids that are experiencing homelessness, Head Start is sometimes that one safe harbor for them. It's a place where they can go during the day. And Head Start not just works with kids, they work with the entire family to help that family find housing, find a job, find other emergency services. So if those kids are not able to access Head Start, they may have no other place to go. But that program, Claire, is still trying to access their funds as of this morning.
All right, and then our next question, it looks like, is from John with KUOW.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, can we get a list of the projects that appear to be frozen in Washington State, or a list of the grants and the money that appears to still be frozen?
We can provide you with some of the information that we're having people call into us. But we don't have, the agencies aren't giving us, we're freezing these projects in your state lists. The way we are finding out about them is people calling us and telling us, wait, I can't access access the portal that is what they use to get the money that they expect to have.
Got it. If the state agencies are compiling lists of these frozen projects, that would be helpful to have. And for Casey Sixkiller, just to follow up, as a former EPA official, I wonder if you can say anything about what you might be hearing from people there about what it's like inside the agency now.
As you can imagine, it's a very difficult time for my former employees at EPA Region 10 in particular. And I think it was why they reported yesterday that the administration is moving forward with terminating folks that work on environmental justice programs. They've suggested the same for folks that work on climate change programs. These are all actions that, agencies cannot take unilaterally. And it has created significant chaos for folks who come to work every day advancing that mission of protecting human health, the environment at EPA. So it's a scary moment for people. It's very unsettling, to say the least. And just so that has a direct impact on our work at the State Department of Ecology. EPA is our closest partner, not just in funding, but in shared mission. So, hollowing out the agency really will impact the work that we're able to accomplish on the ground here in Washington State, as we're working not just to process payments and disbursements from the grant programs, but our permitting programs and all the other things that we do to protect human health and the environment here in Washington State. So it's a big deal. I know it's not just in the region, but also at EPA headquarters as well.
All right, and we're gonna have to wrap up. So last question, we'll go to Jefferson with NCW Life.
Thank you very much. Senator, there are 11 more cabinet appointees still to be voted on in the Senate. If the administration is acting unlawfully, as you say, do you think the public can expect Democrats in the Senate to begin uniformly opposing all these nominations that are still on the docket for the Trump administration?
Well, I'll tell you, it has been really challenging here. Remember, we're only 2.5 weeks into this administration. And a number of times in my lifetime, I have supported cabinet nominees from a president of a different party because I work with them. And there are others who I just absolutely oppose because of what I know they're going to do to their agency. Every senator has kind of come into this year with that approach. But as we have now seen this administration, both Trump and Elon Musk, going into agencies, taking people's private information, using it for we don't know what yet, and really harming the agencies. As Casey talked about, people being told they no longer have jobs, moved around, just the threat to all of the work that is done that is often behind the scenes, but it might be distributing veterans payments. It might be making sure you get your Medicaid or Medicare payment on time. It might be making sure that Meals on Wheels gets their money. All these people are being threatened. There is more and more a feeling that we need to oppose these nominees. However, Jefferson, I need to remind you, sadly, we are in the minority. Every one of these nominees only needs 50 Republican votes, and they are getting them beyond my belief for even the most unqualified and scary nominees that they have.
All right, and we actually do have a little bit more time for your awareness, Senator. The second vote has not yet opened. So we have a question from Robert with the Bellingham Herald.
Hi, thank you very much. I was just wondering if there were specific projects in Bellingham and Whatcom County that officials here had reached out to the senator about.
Let me, Robert, I will be happy to check with my staff on the ground there as well as here to find any specific projects that we are hearing about from Bellingham.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We had a partial list initially, but then, when the order was withdrawn, a lot of folks stopped spending time compiling projects. So thank you.
Yes.
Great. All right. Any final questions from folks? I'm not seeing any new hands raised.
I'd love to ask Senator Murray and Casey, human health is the root of environmental law. It's a bipartisan issue. Those laws were Republican laws. Is there any inkling of bipartisanship as you move forward?
So what I have seen to this moment is Republicans feeling like they have to support Trump no matter what, and Elon Musk no matter what. What will change that is public outcry and for people talking to their Republican members of Congress and saying, hey, this is impacting me. We need you to stand up.
All right. Any final questions before we close Q&A? And if you weren't able to figure out the raise your hand function, feel free to just unmute and let us know your outlet. Okay. With that, we'll conclude.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We will stay in touch as we hear more. Obviously, this is not the end of this story.
Great.
Thank you.
Today's call was recorded, and that recording will be distributed widely. Thanks, everybody.